Well, hello. My name is Dr. Michael Bommarito, and I am the professor for our course starting today in the philosophical problem of evil. And over the time of this course, we're going to be looking at what evil is, what the notions of evil are, and then particularly what the problem of evil is for those of us that are Christians and espouse to follow a God who is omniscient, omnipotent, and omnibenevolent. And so we'll kind of get into some of those sorts of things. But first, I just wanted to welcome you to the class. I'm very excited to be able to walk through this journey with you. I think this is one of the key issues that is addressing the church today, because it's one of the key issues that the world continues to struggle with, continues to redefine for its own benefit, and then continues to use it as a means of pushing off having to address and deal with God. And so we're going to take a look at some of those key issues and how we as Christians can better, more effectively, and definitely biblically address some of these sorts of questions. So it's a very important topic for us to really understand well, not only from the biblical context, but also how do we communicate with the postmodern world that is around us today. And so today what we're going to look at is we're first going to be defining the problem and raising the questions. And so we're going to look at what is evil and why is it a problem? What is the problem of evil? What do we mean by that? And then raising some of the key questions that come out of this whole notion. And then in our subsequent lectures and then in the readings, we'll start to grapple with what might be some of the answers to these questions. I wanted to just talk a little bit, especially in this first lecture, on how I deal with the lectures and the textbooks. The lectures will not be a rehashing of the textbooks. I expect you to be reading those books and interacting with that material according to the uh, the worksheet that's assigned to you in this course. And so I will be discussing these issues on a different level, right? I'm going to be bringing some of my own ideas, some of my own questions, other questions that arise, other issues that arise, and then you can use the readings to bring into that broader discussion. I don't want to just regurgitate what you're reading, otherwise I wouldn't have you read it. So I'm not going to be following any sort of outline connecting directly to the textbooks, but that's part of your role as the student to be connecting what we're discussing in these lectures, then what you're reading, and then bringing that to your assignments and bringing that all together. So sometimes that's a little different for some students, and so and other professors like to follow the textbooks. And so I just wanted to clarify how I sort of approach that as we begin to move forward. One of the key assignments for this course will be our lecture reflection papers. And so each week when you watch watch the lectures, you're going to be asked to write a one-page minimum paper reflecting on and interacting with the content of the lecture, of the day's lecture. And so you're going to be wanting to, in that paper, the reflection should highlight key insights gained, issues of disagreement, or questions that the content may have raised for you. And so what I really want is this: it is a reflection paper where you kind of go back and not just summarize what we were talking about, but really feedback what you're learning. What's something new? What's some new highlight that was like, oh, I hadn't thought about that before. This was really interesting, or this made me think about that, right? Or do you disagree with something I said? I have no problem, with disagreements, and I want to be able to address that, right? right? Particularly with this issue, there's going to be lots of disagreement. And in fact, I will be more concerned if there isn't a sense of disagreement, because then it makes me wonder if you're not really wrestling with the content. I don't want you just simply to agree with me in hopes of getting an A. I want you to wrestle with the content and come to terms with it in your own sense of being able to defend that and discuss that. And then again, what other questions are percolating, are coming up, going, well, wait a minute, well, what about this? Feedback some of those questions to me as well. So that's what I'm looking for in this reflection paper, are some of the things that hopefully the lecture, and then even along with some of the reading, maybe you can raise the question. For example, if perhaps I might disagree with the text, I might say something that the textbook says something different on, and that's all part of the discussion as well. So be looking for those sorts of things as you listen to the lecture today. So hopefully that sets sort of the groundworks of where we're going, and so let's jump into today's content. And so again, we're talking about this notion of evil in the world. And suppose for a moment in some distant forest, lightning strikes a dead tree, resulting in a forest fire. In the fire, a fawn is trapped. It's horribly burned and lies in terrible agony for several days before death relieves its suffering. Not a very, chipper little picture for us to consider, but something that happens. Uh, would you define this as an instance of evil in the world? That this innocent, cute fawn would be caused uh, by no fault of its own to suffer in such a horrible way? Likewise, then, or furthermore, what if we shifted and it wasn't a fawn, but it was a child, maybe a family that was camping, and the child got trapped and burned and suffered for days? Is that an instance of evil? These are some of the things that we begin to wrestle with when we're starting to discuss the concept of evil. And so first, as we start to discuss this problem of evil, we need to come to some sense of terms with regards to what evil is. And so I want to take you just right now to take a minute and write out your initial definition of evil. If someone came up to you and said, "What is evil?" How would you reply? So I'm going to pause and literally give you 60 seconds and for you to give some thought and write this down. And I want you to include this definition in your lecture reflection paper. I'll be looking for it. So just take some time and we'll continue. I'm going to pause it right here. You don't even have to pause, and I will start again in about 60 seconds. So hopefully that gave you enough time to at least just initially begin to wrestle with the issue of what is evil. And sometimes we begin to have to maybe define what isn't evil as well. And that's where we're going to talk a little bit more about what is evil. What is it? What is it when we're talking about evil? What do other people say evil is? And then therefore, why is it a problem for Christians? What are evils? Possibly one way of saying it is that things that one suffers or endures. Ostensive definition would be issues of murder, tsunamis, earthquakes, wars, famines, extinctions, genocides, plagues, all these sorts of things, right, that we consider and we look at the world of acts of suffering. And often philosophers will include sort of more what might be considered trivial evils, such as even vaccinations, addictions that begin to have their effect on people, the death of a pet, thefts. And so in essence, the key sort of ingredient, if you will, of an evil is that of suffering, particularly suffering that is undeserved, but really in its broader sense, in the way the world tends to view evil, is any form of suffering is considered evil. That becomes very significant for our discussion as we begin to discuss what an evil is and then why that then becomes a problem. And so there are various types of evil that we want to consider as well, right? So that as all evils are not created equal, as we might say. And so evil, the term is used to cover not just actions and motives that are wrong or cause suffering, but also suffering in general, say of animals as well as human beings. So in our first story, right, that I sort of described this sort of evil, unnecessary version of suffering, either by this fawn or then by the child. And the two key types of evil that we discuss then are moral evil and natural evil. And moral evil is what I think generally we speak of when we consider aspects of evil, right? The evil that is caused by a moral agent through choice, right? It's the wrongful, harmful acts of one individual or a group of individuals on others, right? And so in our first slide, Lord Voldemort from the Harry Potter series, right? An agent of moral evil who uses his power to control other people to get his will and causes others to suffer and die if they get in his way, right? So this whole notion of the sense of moral evil, right? Of that satanic lust of power that leads to suffering. Then we have what is considered natural evil, and these are evil that are caused in other ways without a moral agent of choice. It's not that someone chooses to do this, but again, it would be the suffering caused by earthquakes or illnesses, these sorts of things. And even then, we might factor in as a subcategory of natural evil, or even maybe a third category of uh, the of uh, necessary evil consequences, right? So for example, the immunization, right? The immunization may in and of itself not be evil, although I do realize that there's a debate as to the evilness of immunizations, but right, but we're talking obviously about the means of injecting the immunization, the pain of the needle, right? Well, that's again, that's not a natural evil, but it's not really a moral evil because the doctor isn't intending to inflict pain, but it's a natural consequence of administering the immunization. And so we might add that third level of natural consequences of evil as well. So again, it's these different types of things that cause suffering, sometimes intentional, sometimes unintentional. And so the problem of evil comes not in the sense so much that evil in and of itself is a problem, although I think most of us would argue that yes, the problem of evil is that evil exists, right? I mean, I think we would all be happy if evil didn't exist. I don't see anyone complaining that evil doesn't exist, or if it didn't exist, right? Well, oh no, it's not fair that there's no evil, right? So, but it's not that evil in and of itself is the problem, but rather it becomes a problem when we start to discuss the existence of evil in a world that is supposedly, by Christian declaration and others as well, right, created by an omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent God. And so here, Mackey is one of the primary individuals who sort of first and maybe best laid out the logical problem of evil for us. And it starts with four key premises. And that is first, that God is omnipotent, that he is all powerful. He can do all things. There is nothing that can be done that he cannot do, right? And even in that little phrase, I kind of tipped my hand a little bit, but the notion that we worship as Christians a God who is all powerful. There is no force greater than God. But also compared to that is God is omniscient, right? He is all knowing. That is a God who, he's aware of what's going on. There aren't things that he isn't aware of. He knows all things, is aware of all things, and so then can factor in all of that knowledge into his decisions, his acts, and these sorts of things. And then we believe in a God who is omnibenevolent, perfectly good, right? That he is all love. There is no evil in him, right? There is no darkness. There are no any of these sorts of things, right? There's no changing of his behavior. He is omnibenevolent. And then the fourth premise of the world in which we live, that, and particularly as we espouse as Christians, is that but evil does exist, right? So in a world where we profess God to be omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent, evil exists. And so these four premises are, according to Mackey, inconsistent, right? You cannot believe them all without contradicting yourself, at least if you're a theist, right? So if you believe 1, 2, and 3, and then admit 4, you have a problem. That 4 wouldn't be the case if 1, 2, and 3 were true, according to Mackey. Mackey then goes on to clarify very, specifically what he means by that problem and where that begins to create problems for people. And that is a sense that, one, that if God is omnipotent, he is capable of eradicating and preventing all of the world's evils, right? If he is all powerful, then he is capable of doing away with evil. Secondly, then, if God is omniscient, he knows about all the world's evils, and he then also knows how to eradicate them. Okay, so it's not that he's, oh, I didn't know that evil was going on. Um, uh, uh, he knows of the evils and he knows how to eradicate. Otherwise, he doesn't know all things, right? And then if God is omnibenevolent, he wants to eradicate and prevent all of the world's evils. And so that then sets up, right? Because why would a loving God want a fawn to suffer for days after being burned until it dies? Why would a God want an innocent child to suffer a disease, cancer, and then die? Why would a God want evil to exist in the world? And so Mackey claims that if these three premises were true, that God was capable of eradicating evil, he knows how to eradicate evil, and he wants to eradicate evil, that therefore evil would not exist in the world. And so therefore, right, God cannot be an omni God. He cannot follow all of these things. So it's quite clear, however, that evil does exist. And so Mackey reaches the following conclusions: that if God is omniscient and omnipotent, he's not omnibenevolent. If he's omniscient and omnibenevolent, he's not omnipotent. And if he's omnipotent and omnibenevolent, he cannot be omniscient, right? Something has to give, right? He can be two of the three, but he cannot be all of the three for this to function properly. And so this then creates the problem of evil for theists and Christians in particular, who hold to the fact and the notion that God is omniscient, omnipotent, and omnibenevolent in a world where evil exists. And so again, for example, God would have created a world right? Where the plates of the ground don't move, and so it wouldn't cause earthquakes that would then cause people to suffer, right? Or God would not have created people who willingly chose to do evil deeds. These are some of the things that Mackey argues that an omniscient, omnipotent, omnibenevolent God would do if he existed. But since he hasn't, something is awry. And so one of the things that we then, as we start to address then the problem of evil, we have to sort of break down the way we approach it. And there are two ways that we seek to discuss the problem of evil: logical problems of evil and evidential problems of evil. Mackey's is an argument of logic, right? It's a logical problem of evil, aims to show that belief in God is irrational and or contradictory, right? So an omniscient, omnipotent, omnibenevolent God wouldn't exist in a world where there was evil, wouldn't allow evil, right? So it's irrational that evil exists, or contradictory. And so Mackey's is probably the best most well-known logical problem of evil. Another argument for the problems of evil aimed to show that the existence of God is unlikely, or that the amount of evil that exists is incompatible with the existence of an all-loving, all-powerful, all-knowing God. And so therefore you would convert Mackey's arguments into an eventual argument. We would then need to replace the phrase cannot be with is unlikely to, right? So it's a little softer, and it fits more then into the case of maybe say the American Western judicial system, right, where we assume innocence, but with a preponderance of the evidence. So we don't have to prove it outright, but it's highly unlikely, right? It is the preponderance of the evidence shows that God doesn't exist. So to defeat an evidential problem of evil, you need to show also that evil does not make God's existence improbable. So you have to build, I think, a bigger case when you're kind of moving through that, to say that as Christians we have to move beyond just the fact of, well, there are circumstances, right? To say, no, you really got to. We as Christians are responsible for creating a very ironclad argument of evidence to show that God's existence isn't improbable in this world where we see so much of what is referred to as evil. And we'll talk more about that, obviously, as we go through the course.